Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Courtroom Insider. My name is Nate Eaton. It is July 2nd, 2025, and Bryan Kohberger has admitted to killing Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Kaylee Goncalves, and Ethan Chapin. It happened today in a plea agreement hearing that was less than an hour long in Boise. We are going to talk about it all tonight and talk about what this means going forward. I'd love to hear where you're watching from, and if you have any questions, we will definitely get to your questions today. Of course, this is a case that the world has followed since 2022 when those 4 University of Idaho students were found dead inside their home in Moscow. It was a bloody scene. It was a horrific scene. And the key suspect, the only suspect, Bryan Kohberger, was arrested a few weeks later in Pennsylvania. Police were able to find him through a series of methods, and including DNA that was collected out of the garbage can at his parents' home. DNA that was on a Q-tip that matched his father, and then when it was run through the Idaho State Police lab, it came back as a match to Bryan Kohberger himself. The DNA was obtained off of a knife sheath, a print that was left on the sheath that was left at the crime scene, and they were able to process that and ultimately led to their suspect. It makes you wonder, what if he had not left that knife sheath behind? That would have been interesting to see if they ever would have found him. Today, Bryan Kohberger showed up dressed in a shirt and a tie with his defense team. People started lining up very early, around 4 or 5 o'clock. Here's some photos and video that I was sent. Media from all over the world there camped out in front of the Ada County Courthouse, the same courthouse, of course, where Chad and Lori Daybell held their trials over the past 2 years. And then people were escorted up to the floor where the sentencing, or where the change of plea was held. Excuse me. Members of the victims' families were walked in, and Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, he had some strong words before the hearing today. Here is what he told the media.
Do you have any message for Kohberger's family?
Yeah, what do you want Kohberger to do?
We know when you flew out here. We know. We have your flight records.
How are you preparing to see him today?
I'm not going to see him.
When you say you know the flight records, what do you mean, Steve?
I know when his parents booked their flight. When his father did.
What does that mean?
You'll find out.
Would you like to say something to them?
No, I don't care about it.
The rest of your family went inside. Was it important for them to be in there today?
Yeah, for sure.
Where are you going? Are you not able to get
getting out of this zoo.
You're not staying in?
No, I'm not going in.
So those were his thoughts. He actually left the courthouse, was not in the courtroom when this plea went down. I cannot imagine what he and the other family members are going through on all sides. His family posted earlier this week on a Facebook page, "We deserve to know when the beginning of the end was." Other families support the plea agreement, including Ethan Chapin's family. Their attorney, they said that they support the deal through a spokesperson, and then the attorney for Mogen's mother said, "While we know that there are some who do not support it, we ask that they respect our belief that this is the best outcome for the victims, their families, and the state of Idaho. We will now embark on a new path. We embark on a path of hope and healing." The scene inside the courtroom was emotional. Family members became increasingly emotional as Judge Hippler explained each charge to Kohberger, naming each victim individually. Some cried into tissues, while others wiped tears away with their hands. Here is that moment while the judge read the charges and how Kohberger responded.
So as to count 1 burglary, the state would have to have proven that on or about November 13, 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, you unlawfully entered a residence, Local County, Idaho, you 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder. As to count 2, the state would have had to have proven that on or about that same date in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died. As to count 3, the state would have had to have proven that on that same date in Latah County, at that same address, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Goncalves, a human being, by stabbing her, from which she died. As to count 4, the state would have had to have proven that on or about that same date in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing her, from which she died. And then as to count 5, also murder in the first degree, that on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing him, from which he died. Do you understand those things the state would have had to have proven?
Yes.
And do you understand that by pleading guilty, the state no longer has to prove those things because you're admitting those things are true?
Yes.
I want to also make, for the record, the defendant has provided with the guilty plea advisory form a document entitled Written Factual Basis that purports to have the defendant's signature dated 1 July 2025. Did you sign that document?
Yes.
And did you agree with the written factual basis that is included there?
Yes.
And then let me ask you, did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Goncalves, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
And then on or about November 13th, 2022, again in Latah County, Idaho, did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
Did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
You know, after he responded to those questions, the judge gave the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, a chance to kind of give an overview, you could say, or a rundown of what their case would be, would have been, what witnesses would have testified to, and what the evidence would have shown. And he went through a pretty detailed timeline going back to March of 2022. This was months before the killings in November, when Kohberger, according to Thompson, purchased a K-bar knife and sheath with an Amazon gift card. And then the following June, he moved to Pullman, Washington to earn his PhD in criminal justice. And then on July 9th, that is the first time that they got a hit of Kohberger's phone hitting on a cell tower near the King Road residence where the 4 students were killed. And between July 9th and November 7th, that phone connected late at night, either between 10 a.m. and 4 a.m., 23 times over those months. July, August, September, October. So over 4 months, 23 times. Now, Bill Thompson was careful not to say that there was no direct evidence that attached him to the actual home, the actual house, but Kohberger's home was in the area of the house 23 times during a series of months. On August 22nd, Kohberger was pulled over for a traffic stop. He had Pennsylvania plates on his car. They were able to get his name, his phone number, his address, all of that information, and he was driving a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. And from there, Thompson went on to describe some other key aspects in the timeline.
The defendant entered the residence of 1122 through the kitchen sliding door on the back side of the residence, which is the side of the residence that would face the area above where the defendant's car was parked. Defendant entered the residence, went to the 3rd floor, and with a knife, killed Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves. The defendant, as he left that room, for whatever reason, ended up leaving, or the sheath for a K-bar knife was left on the bed next to Madison Mogen's body. And I can jump ahead. That sheath was tested by the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab, and single source male DNA was found on the snap of that sheath, as well as blood from both Kaylee and Madison and other trace evidence. But it's important to note single source male DNA was on the snap of that sheath. The state's evidence would show that Xana Kernodle, still awake at this time, in fact, had taken a DoorDash order not long before this started. Her room was not on the 3rd floor, it was on the 2nd floor on the west side. As the defendant was either coming down the stairs or leaving, he encountered Xana, and he ended up killing her, also with a large knife. Ethan Chapin, Xana's boyfriend, was asleep in their bedroom, in her bedroom, and the defendant killed him as well with a large fixed blade knife. Each victim suffered multiple wounds. I will state for the record that there is no evidence there was any sexual component or sexual assault on any of the victims. I want to make that clear so there's no speculation. There were 2 other roommates in the house, and they were already asleep. During the course of this, one of those roommates awoke, looked out her door not knowing what was going on, and saw the defendant, who was dressed in black with a black balaclava on, holding some sort of container in his hand. And she saw him leave the house through the direction of the kitchen to where that sliding door is that I mentioned before. At approximately 4:20 that morning, so this would have been 15 minutes or so later, the defendant's car is seen on a surveillance camera for 1112 King Road, which is immediately next door to the west of 1122, leaving the area at a high rate of speed. And if the court were to see that, or anybody in this courtroom were to see that, you can see the car almost loses control as it makes the corner, heads north, and then turns to go south on Walinta, which is one of the only ways to get out of that part of town. The evidence would show that following that, the defendant in his Elantra drove south of Moscow. We know that he drove on the back roads because there are surveillance cameras on the main highways, Highway 95, that would have picked up the defendant's car if he'd gone that route. And they did not show the defendant's car on that route during the time. So we know that he went through a variety of back roads in very rural, isolated part of Latah County. About 4:48 that morning, the defendant's phone comes back on. The state's evidence will show that following Sunday, November 2, business records show that the defendant began searching for a K-bar knife and a K-bar knife sheath, as the state believes, to replace the one that was left at the scene of the murders. The evidence also will suggest that there were at least attempts by the defendant to delete or alter his purchase history on Amazon, where all these transactions had occurred. Later that week, the state's evidence will show that Mr. Kohberger went to what we would call DMV, motor vehicle licensing here in Idaho, in Pullman, to change his car registration from Pennsylvania to Washington. That's of note because Pennsylvania cars do not require a front license plate. The vehicles seen on the surveillance cameras of the defendant's car showed it didn't have a front license plate on it. At the time of the traffic stop by Deputy Duke in August, it was Pennsylvania plate, no front license plate.
So we got the new plates for the car. Police are searching for the suspect. The word is out. And that is when they are led to Kohberger's home, well, his parents' home in Pennsylvania.
Mr. Kohberger proceeded to finish his semester of studies at Washington State University and returned to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Law enforcement at this point were aware of Mr. Kohberger, had been accessing information about him, were trying to find him. They located him in Pennsylvania, and they conducted what's called a trash pull. During the nighttime hours, agents of the FBI, who assisted immensely with this case, working with the sanitation department back in this neighborhood in Pennsylvania, took trash that had been set out on the street for collection, sent the contents of that from the Pennsylvania residence of the defendant's parents to the Idaho State Forensic Laboratory, where the lab experts there were able to identify DNA on a Q-tip as coming from the father of the person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath that was next to Madison Mogen's body in the bed. Subsequently, an arrest warrant was issued here in Idaho, and a search warrant was issued in the state of Pennsylvania with the assistance not only of the FBI, but the Pennsylvania State Police. Mr. Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home to return to Idaho. Upon his return to Idaho, a DNA sample was taken from him, and it matched the DNA found on the knife sheath.
Now, they did take possession of Kohberger's vehicle once he was in custody, and the prosecutor said that this car was spotless. It was like brand new. It had been thoroughly cleaned. Here's how he described the vehicle.
In Pennsylvania, the defendant's car was seized, and it was actually pretty much disassembled internally. And it also had been cleaned. There was a bucket of cleaner right beside it. I think we can all look to our own cars, you know, in those compartments in the doors. We try to keep them clean where you put stuff. There's always some degree of crud in there. They were spotless. The defendant's car had been meticulously cleaned inside. And the state would present to the jury that that was part of the defendant's plan in covering up this. The defendant has studied crime. In fact, he did a detailed paper on crime scene processing when he was working on his pre-doctorate degrees, and he had that knowledge and skill.
Now, the prosecutor did admit that Kohberger may not have intended to commit all of the murders, but that is what he did. And here is how he ended his remarks.
The state submits that the evidence that I've given just a quick overview of, and that to present in court would consume weeks, which the state is prepared to do and has been prepared to do, would show that as the defendant has just admitted and pleaded guilty on November 13th, 2022, Mr. Kohberger entered the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. He did that with the intent to kill. We will not represent that he intended to commit all of the murders that he did that night, but we know that that is what resulted, and that he then killed intentionally, willfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice forethought, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle. Thank you, Your Honor.
With respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 2, murder in the first degree, as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogen, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Goncalves, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Right.
So with that, the judge accepted the plea. The pre-sentence investigation was waived. Often, well, all the time in Idaho, if somebody is found guilty, there's a pre-sentence report that's done where an investigator will go in and meet with the defendant and family members, and then the defense will show up and argue for a lesser sentence, and the prosecution will argue for a more severe sentence. Because the sentence was agreed upon here, that it's going to be life and no argument, no sense in having a PSI done, a pre-sentence investigation. And so both sides, or the prosecution said, we're going to waive it. The defense agreed to that. And because of that, normally that can take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. The judge said, well, why don't we just do the sentencing this month? In fact, it's very quick. They had time set aside for the trial, which was coming up. But now that there's no trial, they are going to sentence Bryan Kohberger on the 23rd of July. That is going to be a busy week for sentencings. Lori Vallow is sentenced on the 25th of July, along with Jeremy Best. He's sentenced on 23rd, 24th, and 25th, I believe. So we're going to have a lot of crimes wrapping up that day. A lot of defendants. Jeremy Best is the man from the Victor area here in Idaho who killed his pregnant wife and their toddler in a brutal manner, and then was found naked in a sleeping bag just, a couple miles from here. Just a horrible crime. That also happened around Thanksgiving, Christmas time, as did the Kohberger case. So that is the rundown of what happened in the courtroom today. Again, it was a fairly short hearing. I did want to play a little bit of Judge Hippler. Now, Judge Hippler, at the beginning of the case, at the beginning of today's hearing, kind of explained the procedure and kind of had some very strong words for people who have been contacting his office saying, don't take this plea agreement, or put death penalty on the table, or basically telling the judge what to do. Here's what Judge Hippler said.
I want to point out that there have been calls by some for the public to contact me and my office in an attempt to influence my decision-making in this case. This has been extraordinarily disruptive for court staff and the ability for them to get work done, not only in this case, but in other cases where defendants are entitled to have their cases processed, and frankly, as important, if not more so, for victims to have their cases processed in those cases. It's also highly inappropriate. A court is not supposed to, and this court will never, take into account public sentiment in making an opinion regarding its judicial decisions in cases. Courts should, and I always will, make decisions based on where the facts and the law lead me, period. I have not read any of the numerous messages nor listened to any of the numerous voicemails that have been sent to me and my staff. Those have all been forwarded to security and, where appropriate, to law enforcement. I ask that you not continue to mount such campaigns or to send me information like this, because, again, it is not appropriate and, frankly, not something I would take into account when deciding a matter in a case like this. I also want people to understand some very basic concepts about the ideas of separation of powers, and what the court's duties are, and what the duties and the rights of the executive, or in this case, the prosecuting attorney, is. The executive, the elected prosecutor, is the sole authority in deciding what charges to pursue, including whether, as well as what penalties to ask for, and what penalties to pursue, including the death penalty. This court cannot require the prosecutor to seek the death penalty, nor would it be appropriate for this court to attempt to do that. This court, in considering a plea agreement, if it were to reject this plea agreement, cannot force the state to seek the death penalty. My role and power in considering a plea agreement is extremely limited. My role is to ensure that the defendant's plea is given freely, voluntarily, and intelligently. If those things are met, I can only reject a plea, such as the one in this case, where I'm not being asked to agree to the sentence in advance. I can only reject it, for example, if the defendant does not meet or admit to all of the elements of the crime.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that plea agreements are usually, the judge is not involved. It's between the defense and the prosecution. The judge can, of course, reject it or accept it. If it's a binding plea agreement, it means it's binding on the court to go with the recommendation. It is rare that I've seen a judge not go with a plea agreement. And in a high-profile case, it would be surreal and probably unprecedented if judge today had said, nope, I'm not going to go with this plea. We're going to go to trial. That would have been something else. So from there, I want to bring in an expert who has really focused and done a deep dive in this case. He wrote a book, actually. Howard Blum is his name. I've interviewed him before. The name of the book is When the Night Comes Calling, a requiem to the Idaho student murders. He's been following this case from the beginning. He was shocked when the plea agreement came down. And I just wanted to get his thoughts and his takeaways and what he's learning behind the scenes about what may have led to this plea agreement. And so here, I just finished speaking with Howard a moment ago. Here is our conversation. First of all, I'd love to hear your thoughts when you heard that a plea agreement had been reached. Were you surprised?
I wasn't surprised. I was shocked. I didn't see this coming because the prosecution was holding all the cards. I don't understand why they would have agreed to a plea deal. They had a pretty tight case, and it seemed like they were moving gung-ho forward. The judge had just ruled in their favor. The Kohberger team wasn't going to be able to introduce the alternate perpetrator theory. He threw it out completely. He threw out the alibi defense. It looks like they were sitting pretty for a courtroom victory. And yet, I think at the end of the day, the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, just wanted to move on.
So did you think that the defense, after all of these things came out, were rejected by the judge, that they were the ones that said, okay, we have done everything we can, now we'll ask for it? Or do you think they may have been kind of strategizing for several months to get here?
Here's what my reporting has shown. The defense, pretty early on, I think, realized that their case had holes in it. As soon as that alibi came out, and Bryan Kohberger's alibi was basically that he was driving in a wilderness park at 4 a.m, looking at the stars on a cloudy night when it was freezing. They had to realize that didn't hold much water. They never tried to start screaming from the rooftops, get my client out of jail. We have an innocent man here. He has to be released. They realized that they have real problems with the case. But Ann Taylor, to her credit, she has to defend her client. She tried to throw everything out there that she could. You know, there's an old legal saying, when you have the facts, you pound the facts. When you don't have the facts, you pound the table. And she was pounding the table pretty well for 2.5 years. But at the end of the day, she just didn't have anything left to pound. The judge said, enough already. We're going to have to go to trial. And she did an inventory of what she had. And she had nothing. And her problem all along, and this is again reporting I've been doing, her client, Bryan Kohberger, every time he was approached, nixed a plea deal largely because of his mother. His mother was opposed to it. His mother said, we want to have our day in court. She thought somehow that this would all be resolved in her son's favor. Then, after the 2 latest motions were thrown out, the alternate perpetrator and the alibi defense, something else became clear to the defense team, and they shared this with Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger's mother very possibly could have had to go on the stand and discuss what was said during a telephone call that her son made at 6 o'clock in the morning, Idaho time, approximately 2 hours after the murders. She would have to say what she heard, what was her impression, what she felt her son was talking about. And Bryan Kohberger was told that this could incriminate your mother, perhaps, and perhaps put her in legal jeopardy. And
Wow.
I think that weighed a lot on him. He also was told that his father would be put on the stand and have to discuss what happened during their cross-country trip from Washington State University back to Pennsylvania during the Christmas vacation period of 2022. I discussed this a great deal in my book, What Went On. It's hard to get the specific bits of the conversation, but think about it. Here was Bryan Kohberger's father sitting shoulder to shoulder in a Hyundai Elantra for 4 days with his son. He knows every cop in the country is looking for a white Hyundai Elantra, just like the car he happens to be in. He knows his son lives 10 miles away from the murder scene. He knows his son has had behavioral issues, been a heroin addict. He was concerned enough about his son to want to go out to Washington State. When he first went out there, he went with him, he accompanied him, and now he's driving back with him again, 3 months later. So I think the parents had a sense of what was happening, and they were going to be put on the stand by the prosecution and asked specific questions. And they made it clear, Ann Taylor's team made it clear to Kohberger that might not be a position you want to put your parents in.
Howard, do you know the contents of that 6 a.m. call with his mom?
I sure wish I did.
Yeah.
I think no one knows it about but Bryan Kohberger and his parents, and I think the prosecution was going to try to find out on the stand and make a situation that might have been uncomfortable. There also has been previous reporting that I've done that Bryan Kohberger's sister, back in their home in Pennsylvania, after Bryan and the father returned from this Christmas vacation trip, was suspicious about her brother's behavior, the way he was cleaning the car, putting his garbage into plastic bags. And she confronted the father. What's going on? This is a white Hyundai. They're looking for a white Hyundai. And the father's reaction, as I heard it, was just to walk out of the room. That was a moment that was too large for him to confront. Throughout this case, there's been so many perplexing mysteries, and they're largely because of the moments become too large for people to confront. Psychologists would call this cognitive dissonance. I mean, I got a B- in psychology, so I'm certainly no authority on cognitive dissonance, but it would seem that way for the two young women who were, in survivors of the murder house. For the Kohberger family, it's just a difficult situation to deal with, and your heart goes out to all these people in these situations, and they don't respond in reasonable, rational ways.
When the prosecutor today laid out just a surface overview of what they had intended their case to be, as far as the timeline and Kohberger's movements and the cell phone and all of that, we had actually seen a lot of that in Dateline a few weeks ago, the Dateline that caused the big kerfuffle with the judge and all of that. Do you think that and the media coverage played into this plea agreement at all, or was this going to happen regardless of how much media attention this got?
I mean, Ann Taylor had seen everything that was in the Dateline episode beforehand. She had gotten the discovery. I have to say, for the record, I was part of that Dateline team that did that, so I can't go into too much about it. But it was all out there, and Ann Taylor knew, the prosecution knew. What I thought when he presented his case, what I found interesting, he kept on, from time to time, making caveats. He said, well, we don't have all this evidence. He said, we're in the vicinity of the murder house, but we can't say he went into the murder house. Yeah. He was trying to, I think, tacitly make the case for his taking a plea deal, that he might have lost the case.
There might have been some openings or some moments of doubt. Yeah.
Right. Reasonable doubt for the juror. I think that's a very pragmatic way, and it's not the way one expects a prosecutor to go forward after 2.5 years when he certainly had enough evidence. And most disturbingly, we're going to be left with so many questions, so many things we'll just never know. And they added to that today, too, another thing that I found particularly disturbing. They let the gag order stay in place until September 23rd, after the sentencing hearing. So after it's all done, well, then people can talk, but then they hope it's too late. To go on a bit, from the very beginning, I believe this has been a case that the state of Idaho would have liked to just see disappear. Look at all the people involved in the case. Judge, as soon as he got an opportunity, he was the first judge based in Moscow who had an opportunity to leave the case. He moved it to Boise, and then he just left. He said, "Take it away from me. I don't want a part of this."
Yeah.
The chief of police, Judge Fry, as soon as he could, he retired. As soon as Kohberger, he didn't want a piece of this. Judge Hippler, the first day he takes the stand, he says, "I'd like to say I'm happy to be here, but I'm not." He wanted this to go away. Even the University of Idaho, what did they do with the murder house? Let's get rid of it. Let's make believe this never happened, as if people would forget. So I think, this has been one more push to let's move on. But the reality is, the tragedy is that I don't think people in Idaho are going to move on. I don't think people in Moscow are going to move on. And certainly the surviving families are not going to move on.
Yeah, the thing about having a trial, especially one of this length, is you get to see all of the evidence. You get to hear from witnesses that now we may never even know their names, people that may have seen things or known things that unless they decide to publicly come forward and say, "I was there," it's hard to get the whole picture because there is no trial. Now, on the other hand, though, you save millions of dollars, and some of the families have said they're glad, they want to move forward. Others are not happy with this plea agreement. So it's kind of a mixed thing. I think one of the main things I'm hearing, I'm sure you are too, is just how rushed this was. I mean, 4 days ago, this was going to trial, and here we are on a Wednesday afternoon, and it's not. It's done, except for sentencing.
I mean, you raise a very valid point. They're just trying to get this off the table. Let's move on. We got the holiday break. July 23rd, we'll have the sentencing, and then we can all move on. We're going to keep the gag order in place until after the sentencing, so no one can find out anything in the interim. And then after July 23rd, when the gag order will be released, well, then reporters can go out and maybe they can find something. Maybe people won't be interested. I think that's what the prosecution is hoping.
Let me ask you, Howard, there's a lot of serial killers, murderers, high profile people that seek the attention and that do interviews or, are out there. Does Bryan Kohberger strike you as one of those? I mean, do you think we'll ever hear from him in a prison interview or in writings that he releases, or is he going to go away and live in prison and be quiet?
My opinion is we're going to hear a great deal from him. This is a guy who I believe thinks he's the smartest person in the room. I think he'll have insights to share. And I also think he'll be bored stiff. He'll want to talk. He'll want to bring in Dr. Catherine Ramsland, his own professor, to talk to him. I'm going to send him my email address. I'm always available, Brian. You want to tell what really happened? I'd love to tell it. I think he might not hear from him for 6 months, but you're going to be sitting in that cell for the next 40 years. He's going to have to fill his time. And I think people are going to come to him. I think criminal justice professors, students, authors, all going to be there, flocking to his door.
Well, how are you going to fill your time now that you have 3 months to not go to a trial?
Well, fortunately, I like telling stories. I really don't go into true crime. I signed for another book a couple of months ago. I'm doing a new book about the stranded astronauts who were up in space, something completely different. Ron Howard is involved for the movie production of this. So I'll be spending my time in Houston this summer rather than Idaho.
Oh, wow. Well, we'll have to have you back to talk about that book. That sounds fascinating. Anything that you want to add, Howard? Anything that you think the public should know about this case, or kind of your overall takeaway today after this flurry of events this week?
I was, annoyed by several things. At one point, Ann Taylor was asked, she had to agree to every question the judge asked, and he asked her about discovery. Are you satisfied with that you've received all the discovery information? She's filed 2 major motions about not receiving sufficient discovery. Suddenly, he asked her today, there's sort of a pregnant pause, but then she agrees. Was she being honest? Was before a contrivance? When is the truth? Also think about her associate, Miss Massoud. Miss Massoud at times had put her arm around Bryan in the courtroom hearings and said it's an honor to defend him. Perhaps she maybe owes the families an apology. Then we go to Bill Thompson, his crying at the end when he finishes his recitation of the case history. To me, that seemed like a bit of courtroom theater. Bill Thompson, that I've seen, that I've heard, that I've researched, is a tough prosecutor. I think he was trying to show that even though things were done in such a hasty way, even a cavalier way by just sending an email to the families involved, he was deeply touched. He was trying to convey this. I think it was more theater than sincerity. I hope I'm wrong.
I noticed all of those moments that you mentioned true, especially when the judge was asking Ann Taylor those questions. And then I think the public that has paid close attention to this may think, well, wait, has this all just been a game? Is it, well, what's going on here? As you said, these motions that we're not getting discovery, these arguments, you need to block this or block this. And then here we are again, 4 days later, and yep, it's all right.
I mean, Ann Taylor filed a motion when she was asking for continuance that buried on page 30 was something I found really interesting. She said trials are basically story building. Each side tries to build a story and then convince the jurors that their story is true. And it's a very candid but very cynical approach to American justice. And I think we've seen another episode in the story building today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Speaking of stories, if you want to read Howard's book, it is available. You can get a digital copy about this case, When the Night Comes Falling. I got that right? When the Night Comes Falling?
A Requiem for the Idaho Student Murders. And it just came out in paperback this week with a new afterword.
That's right. Thank you very much, Howard. Good to see you, and I appreciate you making time for us. From murder to astronauts. Quite sounds like a news reporter, actually. That's kind of what we do. You jump into the crime, and then tomorrow I might be serving up ice cream somewhere. Big thanks to him for that conversation, and you can, of course, check out his book. I want to get to your questions and comments, but for those of you that are really fascinated by this case, I got to tell you about a website that newspapers.com created for this trial. It's fascinating. You can spend hours there. Here it is. You can find it at newspapers.com/Idaho Murders. And this gives you the information from the case. You can listen to analysis. There's key facts, as you can see here in the Idaho murder case, the victims, the location, the discovery, the murder weapon. Look at that who's who of the key players involved. There's a timeline of those who were involved. And then there's all sorts of newspaper clippings, newspaper articles from the beginning of this case. There's the one, 4 University of Idaho students killed. That was likely the very first story that came out about this. I remember that day so clearly. When we posted it on East Idaho News. That one's from the Associated Press. And then if you scroll down, investigate unanswered questions. What was the motive? Which we don't know at this point. He hasn't said a motive, but there's some interesting theories on there, or interesting thoughts on there, along with the newspapers coverage from all over the years. So newspapers.com created this for you, for our Courtroom Insider audience, which we so appreciate them. They're doing a deal through all of July, 20% off. If you go to newspapers.com/Nate, you can get 20% off, or type in that promo code and you can enjoy a subscription. And I really appreciate those of you that have signed up, and I love to hear the stories of what you've found. So if you found a great story about your family or something interesting, send me an email. I'll share some of those stories over the next few days and month, actually, as we go into Courtroom Insider as time goes on. So thank you, newspapers.com. All right, everybody, you ready for the 4th? It's coming up here, just a few days. I'm excited for that. Questions. Nancy, the families of the kids who were slain are mentioned all the time, but I don't hear about the other 2 girls in the house that survived. Don't they have a say in the plea deal? Ooh, good question, Nancy. There were 2 roommates who survived in the house. I would imagine the prosecutors consulted with them. Ultimately, after speaking with the victims, ultimately, though, it rests with the state. This is the state's case. They get to decide. And when you have so many victims, it can be hard to get everybody on the same page, as we've seen kind of with some of the families that want the plea and then the one that doesn't. It can be hard, and I'm sure it's a lot to process. But yes, they can consult with the 2 surviving roommates, but ultimately the prosecutor decides the plea deal. What is the written factual basis document that Kohberger wrote? Is it his version of the accounts? Kathy asks. I don't know if I've seen that. They've referenced it today, obviously, and I think they have to get it in writing for him to say, yes, I did it. Now, does he have to go into great detail about why? No. In fact, the state never has to prove a motive when they go to court. They just have to prove that he did it beyond a reasonable doubt. So it can be basically what he told the judge. It'll be fascinating if that becomes public to see what he wrote. And I imagine it would be. I imagine it would be a public record. Judy says, will I attempt to one day interview the families? I would love to interview the families. I'm going to be honest. I have reached out to a few early on, and I just haven't followed up. I've been so tied up with other news and other trials and whatnot. But if the families would want to talk to me, I would love to speak with them. There's a lot of people in Eastern Idaho that have ties to the University of Idaho, went to law school there, or went to school or have family up there. So yeah, I'd love to talk with them. Can the public or family do anything to change the plea deal? Well, not anymore. It's on the record. And, if he signed it, I guess perhaps he could come in a few days and say, never mind, I want it off the table. But I don't think that's going to happen. Rosemary, will Kohberger ever have to share details of how he committed the heinous crime? The most he will have to share is what he shared today. He admitted guilt. He doesn't have, there will still be unanswered questions for a long time. And maybe one day he'll tell all. You heard what Howard said there, that he thinks he might talk. I don't know. That would be interesting. Nate, will you be at the sentencing? It's very close to Lori's. I know. I don't know if I'll make it to the sentencing simply because I fly to Arizona the very next day. And so that's a lot to go. But I'll be covering it regardless. I'll be covering it from here if I don't make it out there, or we might go there and then fly to Arizona. So I'll keep you posted. Will family get to speak at sentencing? Good question. Yes, they will. They will get to read victim impact statements. They don't necessarily have to take the stand if they don't want to. They can submit a letter, but they will get to speak. They will get to address Kohberger. Kohberger will also get to read a statement if he wants, or he may remain quiet. It all depends, but he will be given time if he wants to say something. Does Idaho have the death penalty? Sharon asked. Yes, it does. And that means that if a jury finds someone guilty of first-degree murder and death penalty is on the table, there then becomes a mitigation part of the trial where the more witnesses can be called. We saw it in Chad Daybell's trial where the prosecution called witnesses arguing that Chad Daybell should get death. Chad didn't call any witnesses. He waived it, but he could have presented witnesses on why he should get life. And then the jury goes back and decides whether you get death or life. And so that, of course, with this case, they took death penalty off the table for Kohberger pleading guilty. Death is used a lot. In a lot of cases, they'll put it on the table and then they use that as a bargaining tool for to have it taken off if someone, wants to do life in prison. Okay. My question is, will Kohberger have to allocute at sentencing? Kohberger could speak, as I said there, but also, again, he might say little, he might say nothing, he might say a lot. It's up to him. Do you think law enforcement will continue to search for the knife? They did mention today that they don't have the knife, and I think they will, but once the case is done, I don't know how many hours are going to be put into it. It'd be fascinating if Bryan Kohberger ever said where the knife was. Did he throw it in a river somewhere? Did he bury it? Did he take it to the dump? Did he throw it in a garbage can, and who knows where it's at now? That's a good question. Shout outs. Normally I do shout outs first, but I'm mixing things up tonight. Tiffany and Brett Wallace, Donna Lane, 41st birthday to Tyson Price. Hi, Tyson. Happy birthday. Peggy Schaefer, Charlie Barrow, Paige Welts, Jolanda Van Morsel. Oh, I love your name, Jolanda. Or maybe it's Yolanda, but it's spelled with a J. Leslie Mitten, Skylar Sanchez, Becca Sawyer, and Eric Jasper. We have people watching from all over the world. This is incredible, crazy. Almost said crazy. Incredible, crazy. Nova Scotia, Canada, Isle of Wight, UK, Spain, Auckland, New Zealand, Scranton, PA. Isn't that where the office takes place? Scranton. Germany, Israel, wow, India, Poland, the Netherlands, South Africa, and Melbourne, Australia. Thank you all very much for watching. Here's where you can find me. I'm on all the socials that are on here. I'm not on TikTok, but I am on Facebook, Instagram. I'm on X, and I'm on YouTube, and that's hopefully where you have subscribed. Thank you for subscribing, for supporting EastIdahoNews.com. We'll be back tomorrow night. We'll wrap up the week, the short week. Rachel Smith, prosecutor, is going to be here. I'm going to get her thoughts on the Kohberger ruling, on my interview with Lori Vallow-Daybell, on other crime things that are happening. And I'd love to hear your questions and your comments tomorrow night. And then it's the 4th of July. And if you're looking for something to do on the 4th, come to Idaho Falls to the biggest fireworks show west of the Mississippi. East Idaho News is doing helicopter rides. We still have a few slots left. You can sign up at eastidahonews.com and come and ride on a helicopter on the 4th of July. It's incredible. You fly over the Idaho Falls, like the actual falls. You go out over the mall, over Melaleuca Field. It's a really fun time. And you get to meet all of us, the East Idaho News team. So there you go. We'll be back tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Mountain. Thank you all so much for watching. This is Courtroom Insider. I'm Nate Eaton. Until next time.